So we have arrived at the halfway mark on these series of reviews. Resident Evil 4. Developed by Capcom and directed by series shepherd Shinji Mikami, it was announced as part of the Capcom 5, an initiative to bring third-party support to the Nintendo Gamecube. And the biggest get of all of these was certainly Resident Evil 4. It fixed eyes on the system, and especially when Mikami stated that Resident Evil 4 will definitely release only on Gamecube. If it comes to another console, I'll cut my head off. Now that was back in 2002. Now this was a big deal, as the series is, and was, synonymous with the PlayStation brand. Resident Evil 4 released to critical success on the 11th of January 2005 on the Gamecube, before it then came to PS2 in October of the same year. It has since become the closest thing to Skyrim, being available on pretty much all systems known to man, and this has helped it reach the highest sales of any Resident Evil that we've covered on the channel so far, at over 10 million. Now I first played Resident Evil 4 on my friend's Gamecube on release day. We sweated the game for months and I loved it at the time. Now it is regarded as one of the best games of all time, and for a lot of the fanbase, RE4 is their favourite. But unlike the other games in the series, I don't look back on this title with reverence. If anything, the passing of time has made me sour on the game. I look back and think, this is where it all went wrong. Now I haven't played this game for over 15 years, so the questions I'll be answering in this review are: does it hold up playing it this long since release? Do I feel the same way I did going into it? And finally, does it even deserve to be called a Resident Evil game? Now if you've been enjoying my content, then put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more reviews in the coming weeks. And that's enough of that. Let's dive headfirst into this, and as always I'm splitting this review into plot, gameplay and presentation. 6 years have passed since the events in Raccoon City. Leon Kennedy has been recruited and trained by a secret service under direct control from the president. His first assignment? To look after the president's family. And, in typical Leon fashion, as soon as he starts, it all goes to shit. The president's daughter, Ashley Graham, has been kidnapped. Intelligence leads Leon to investigate a village in rural Spain and a mysterious cult called the Los Illuminados. Now, unlike the Resident Evil games up to this point, this story is very different. Not only is it a rescue mission, not just an escape, it gives context, direction and character through detailed cutscenes and character conversations through a rip-off of Metal Gear's Codex. The benefit to this is it means the Rogues Gallery get a real chance to shine. Gone are the days of seeing the big bad stare at a CCTV across the entire game before a final face-to-face reveal and a fight right at the end. Here we get to know the enemies. I'm not sure how they all got his number, but regardless, they all manage to get screen time by giving threats or taunting Leon to try and overcome the odds that are heavily stacked against him. And it's brilliant. Having sections of the game dedicated to a single big bad, all the while getting closer and closer to the head of the Los Illuminados, is an excellent way to create progress, without some arbitrary random boss fight. They all feel like actual roadblocks on your journey. And it helps that the Rogues Gallery here are all designed brilliantly, feeling unique and timeless. You've got Rasputin, anemic Milky Bar Kid, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the Sith who's got a dildo for a staff. The only downside to this delivery of the plot is that the files you find across the game are generally throwaway, mostly just warnings about enemies that are down the line and communications between leadership to the grunts. But given the choice between the two, I think the codex and cutscenes work excellently to get you invested in the plot. Now what helps sell the experience even more is the cheese level. RE4 sits back and revels in its cheddar. Older entries with their dodgy voice acting and limited performances meant it was unintentionally funny. They lean into it here, giving off a typical Saturday morning cartoon flavour to the over-the-top scenes that are on display during the game, and it just works to make it feel like a cohesive experience. It had me invested in seeing the story right through to the end.
Stick around.
Resident Evil 4 reinvents the series in pretty much every way. Gone are the fixed camera angles. Instead, the camera is moved to a third-person perspective before it swings up to an over-the-shoulder view for aiming. Aiming? Yep, that's new. Here, you can aim in all directions instead of just up and down, which means you could target specific parts of an enemy to cause them to stumble, fall over, or simply disarm them with a shot to the hand. Did I say disarm them? Yep, that's right, we aren't fighting zombies this time. In fact, there isn't a virus in the entire game. Here, it's a parasite which is controlling all the villagers and turning them into ganados, people who can wield weapons, run, climb, and operate machinery. The item box, you remember that? Well, that's gone. Instead, it's an inventory which can be upgraded to fit all your weapons, heals, and ammunition, and you take all of it out with you at the same time. Okay, but that's it, right? Well, remember finding weapon parts for upgrades? Gone. Instead, here you find money and jewels as you play, and you use this to upgrade or buy new guns. Well, what about the tank controls? Surely they're not gone. No, well, kinda. You're fixed in place to shoot, but you have so much control over your movement with the third-person camera, especially compared to earlier entries, and you can interact with tons of the environment, like leaping through windows or kicking down ladders. It doesn't feel anywhere near as restrictive as the series used to. Now, let's go through the positives. Combat in RE4 is genuinely fun. Enemies are thrown at you constantly, and shooting them in the head before running up for a quick Kia! Is always satisfying. This is helped by all the weapons serving a purpose. Purchasing and using the arsenal in the right scenarios can be the make or break between surviving an encounter or not. And the amount of space on offer in the inventory means you never have to worry about not purchasing a gun. You can squidge them all in, if you played Tetris well enough. And by God, this is the best item organization in the entire series. I lost hours making sure my big box looked perfect.
Oh, behave.
Speaking of purchasing weapons, the Merchant. He's a true icon. There isn't any Resident Evil fan alive who wouldn't crack a cheeky smile to,
"What are you buying?"
The gameplay loop of killing enemies to get gold, to spend it on becoming more powerful, works exceptionally well to keep you engaged. Actively seeking out combat encounters to get more loot, to become even more powerful, is addictive. And it also helps that it brings exploration into this upgrade loop. From the merchant himself, you can buy treasure maps, which highlight valuable items across the environment. Now fortunately, the map system here is excellent, and so finding these treasures is an actual joy. I loved backtracking and exploring areas to find every treasure I could, so I could continue to rake in those big stacks. Now, there's one issue with all of this. It just isn't Resident Evil. Now let me explain. Being rewarded for combat, never having to worry about ammo, never having to think about what to take out with you into the field, as you have access to all your items at all times, that's a power fantasy, not a survival horror. In every review up to this point, I've laboured the fact that tension is evoked by your decision making and planning. While here, there isn't any need for any of that. So instead, they try to evoke tension by the sheer number of enemies that they throw at you. And it just doesn't work. In fact, across the entire game, there was only one section that I felt any fear, and that's when you take on the invisible enemies in the sewer, as you can't simply shoot your way out of it. You need to stop, listen, slow down. The thing previous games did as a standard to evoke fear is only utilised this one time. Now I bet you're screaming, what about the regenerators? Sure, they sound spooky, but when you could just tap them in the leg and sprint off, where's the danger there? The fear evoked by your choices in planning and decision making is much better than throwing numbers at you, and it robs the game of any potential feelings of anxiety it could have induced. Instead, it's a fun trip, and Resident Evil should never just be a fun experience. It should be much more than that. In fact, the game's description is experience a new era in survival horror, but it's not. It's an action game. Now, the other key component to making a Resident Evil game is puzzles. Puzzles, oh yeah, there's two. Right. You see my point here. A reinvention to any series is bound to happen as it ages. I don't think that's a bad thing. But when you lose everything that made the previous game so special, you aren't reinventing, you're creating a new series. The only links this game has to previous entries are a couple of key characters and green herbs. And that's it. Now I know I've chucked a major dampener on the game here, but it's something I'm not going to get over. I'm an old school Resident Evil fan, and I do appreciate reinvention and reimaginings. Hell, I love RE7. But RE4 in my mind, they've moved so far away from what makes an RE game an RE game. They've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Now you're probably expecting me to say that hearing Leon, help! Is my final negative point. But no, I actually don't mind it. Going into this experience, I thought I'd end up waking up in cold sweats. Ashley's voice echoing across all the chambers of my brain, tormenting me for years to come. I'd eventually seek therapy before relapsing and choosing to end it all on a really overly elaborate suicide, where you need 3 different keys and to move a few statues, dodging some well-placed traps, to find my, by this point, skeletal remains. But in reality, the game is paced so well that you aren't actively on an escort mission for too long, and when you are, you're given tools to avoid frustration. You can order her to stay or follow to ensure she isn't too close or too far away from you at any one time. And in most combat encounters, you can just bin her off. Literally. So no, I didn't have a single issue with Ashley throughout the entire game, which is a big surprise for me. My final negative is actually with the in-game economy. And I'll admit, this is the smallest negative out of the lot. Specifically, my problem is the price of the RPGs. Now for 30,000 pesos, you could buy a single-use RPG, which kills any enemy, including bosses, in one hit. Now in comparison, the Broken Butterfly, which is a magnum, is generally used for bosses, and that costs 38,000 pesos. Now to fully upgrade its power, you're talking 360,000 pesos. Now that's the cost of 13 rocket launchers. It just begs the question, what's the point in even bothering to spend all that cash when you could just one-hit slap a boss? Now RE4 has fantastic bosses. In fact, there isn't one bad boss in the entire game, which is massive praise. So being able to essentially skip these fights with hardly any cost is stupid. If the rocket launcher was 100,000 pesos, you'd at least stop and think before dropping that level of cash. It would mean you'd have to forego a lot of upgrades on your way to saving that amount of money. But as it stands, from the midpoint, I always had one in my inventory, and still had loads of room for all my heals and other weapons, including the Magnum. Sure, I could have just gone without the RPG, but there didn't really seem to be any detriment in having one at all times. And to me, that's just bad game design. Now, I know I've been laying into this game for the past few minutes, so I feel I do need to clarify. I really enjoyed playing this game at all times. I was on board for the gameplay loop, and I found exploration and combat extremely fun. But it shouldn't be called Resident Evil, or even a survival horror, and that's my issue here. I've played and captured the gameplay here from the PS4 HD release of Resident Evil 4. Now I've gone back and reviewed some older Gamecube footage to ensure I'm not speaking out of turn on this, but Resident Evil 4 was, and still is, very pretty to look at. The character models are absolutely stellar, and a massive step up from previous entries in the series, with a wide variety of animations and in-game cutscenes which at the time blew me away, and even now still look brilliant. What helps make this game pop so much to me is the varied environments and gameplay sequences. Resident Evil 4 features so much variety, it's outstanding. From the starting location in villages and small farm buildings, to labs, cold urban forts, castles, ruins, and even mines, the constantly changing scenarios you find yourself in ensure the game always feels fresh. And fortunately, the design on all of these areas is top notch. Resident Evil 4 features a ton of dialogue from all of the cast, and this is where we finally get the more modern style of performance that we expect from our games. And it was here that Resident Evil finally ascended in this department. I love all the script work and performances delivered by the entire cast, but for me, the two highlights here are Paul Mercier as Leon Kennedy. He just emanates cool throughout, a proper alpha lad.
So, after you take me back to my place, how about we do some, overtime?
While Renee Mujica, as Salazar, dives deep into the cheese drawer to create a voice for a villain that is creepy, but also fun. Proper 90s cartoon villain vibes, and I love it. In terms of sound, all the enemies throughout have their own unique noises, which immediately inform you of the threat that you're about to blast into the next dimension, and they all work great to give them a true sense of identity. The soundtrack in Resident Evil 4 is good. I wouldn't say it's great, like earlier entries. Now this is due mostly to the tracks being there just for ambience and mood setting, sinking more into the background, whereas older entries in the series, they were themed per area, which added more to the experience in making locations feel distinct with sound. Now there are great tracks like Serenity and the Save theme, which I highly recommend adding to your Spotify playlist. They're mega nostalgic. It's just a shame that the rest of the soundtrack doesn't transcend to that same level. Resident Evil 4, as a game, is fantastic. It stands up incredibly well, even today. It's essentially a perfect game to play. The plot is engaging, with a fantastic rogues gallery, excellent script work, and performances from all the cast. The gameplay is fun at all times, with the most varied campaign in any Resident Evil game up to this point. However, reinventing the series to this extent means it lost what made it unique as a franchise. It lost its choice planning and decision making in favour of a streamlined experience, which forgoes horror and puzzles for action. And in my mind, it isn't a Resident Evil in any way. And so even though I would recommend this game to anybody wanting a fun experience, if you're looking for your next Resident Evil fix, this certainly isn't it. Now I know that this is going to be controversial, especially for a game as beloved as this one, but I can't change what makes Resident Evil for me, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that view. Now I'd love to hear from you in the comments on this. Do you vehemently disagree with me, or do you feel the same? I love responding to all of you on my channel, and so even if we do feel completely different about the game, I'd love to discuss it with you. But thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, put a like on it, and subscribe to the channel for more Resident Evil content. Resident Evil 5 should be up next week, and I really look forward to seeing you back here again. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.